In this video, we're going to study chapter 6 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics for the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Classical Ethics course. And I'd like to, before we get started with this chapter, I'd like to say that if you haven't studied Porphyry's introduction or Aristotle's categories in classical reasoning, you're not going to understand what Aristotle is talking about in chapter 6 of book 1. And what I'd recommend at this point is that you either just skip chapter 6 and go on to chapter 7, or go and focus on your study of classical reasoning so that you can come back and read chapter 6 and understand what he's talking about. I'm going to read through the chapter and make a few comments, but I'm not going to try and explain concepts which really need to be studied in detail in their appropriate place, and the appropriate place for that study is in classical reasoning. So that's just a warning before we get started. If you read chapter 6 and feel like you have no idea what he's talking about, I mean, our reading through chapters 1 through 5 has been pretty simple. And then we get to chapter 6 and he talks about some topics that just seem to come out of nowhere and are very complicated. And the reason why is because, as I said, Aristotle teaches that there's a method for the pursuit of philosophical study, and that method is reasoning. And he's assuming that anyone who's studying ethics would have already advanced in the study of that method. So if you don't study classical reasoning, you're going to run into lots of problems if you try to study classical philosophy. And that's why it's sort of funny to see how many people talk about studying ethics or physics or metaphysics who have never studied classical reasoning, because really you can't. You can't understand what Aristotle's talking about in this chapter unless you've studied classical reasoning. The good news is that everything that's needed to understand chapter 6 in ethics is explained in Classical Reasoning 1 in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. So it's pretty basic if you've studied classical reasoning, and I recommend that you go and put the time in, put the effort in Classical Reasoning 1 so that you can actually read chapter 6 and understand what he's talking about. I'll comment a little, but we're going to read through what's a pretty lengthy chapter and try to get this video completed in as little time as possible. All right, so chapter 6 of book 1 of Aristotle's Ethics. Aristotle says, perhaps it is better to consider universal good, or the genus of good, and inquire how it is said to subsist, though such an enquiry as this will be arduous, because the men who have introduced these ideas, which Aristotle is going to disagree with, Aristotle says, are our friends. It may seem to be better, and indeed necessary to the salvation of the truth, to subvert the opinions even of our friends. For both being our friends, Plato and the truth, that is, it is holy to give preference to the truth. So Aristotle says that this discussion is going to be difficult because I need to reject a certain set of ideas, and those ideas are ideas that were actually taught by my friends. And in this set of friends, he's referring to Plato and Plato's followers. Remember, Aristotle himself was taught by Plato and studied in Plato's school, but as he grew and matured in his philosophy and advanced, he came to see that some of the ideas taught by Plato were false, and therefore they need to be rejected. And if we need to choose between our friends and the truth, he says, it's holy to choose the truth. Those who have introduced this opinion that the good is a universal class of things. And again, if you haven't studied Porphyry's introduction or Aristotle's categories, you're not going to understand these ideas, and I can't afford the time to explain them here, but Plato proposed that the good was a class of things into which all other things could be included. And Aristotle rejects that teaching, and here explains why. Those who have introduced the opinion that good is the ultimate genus or universal do not make ideas of things in which they admit there are the prior and posterior. Hence, neither do they establish an idea of numbers. Excuse me. But good is predicated of essence. Good is predicated of essence, and this word essence is the same word substance, one of the 10 categories in Aristotle's categories. Good is predicated of essence or substance, as well as of quality and of relation. If you've studied classical reasoning, you'll know what Aristotle's talking about. Essence, quality, and relation are 3 of Aristotle's 10 categories. Good is predicated of 3 different classes or categories of things. Therefore, the word good must be used in a number of different senses or with a number of different definitions. That, however, which has a subsistence per se or in and of itself, he's referring there to a substance or essence, are naturally prior to that which subsists as a relative. For this, a relative, resembles the branch of a tree and an accident of being, so that there will not be a common idea in these. Again, good is predicated in as many ways as being, for it is predicated in essence as God and intellect, which are essences and are said to be good. And good is predicated in quality as the virtues. And good is predicated in quantity as what is moderate. Good is also predicated in relation as what is useful, as utility. Good is predicated in time as occasion. We say that a certain time is good. It's a good time. Good is also predicated in place, such as a habitation. If we say this is a good place, we say the word good, but it doesn't mean the same thing as we meant when we said a good man or a good virtue or a good time. The word good is used in a number of different ways or multifariously. And after the same manner in the other predicaments, and predicaments is just another English word for the categories. Again, if you don't study classical reasoning, to even try to make sense of this reading would be impossible. And I'll try to do it as we go along, but I'm just telling you, there's so much information in this chapter that's only possible to understand if you've already studied Porphyry's introduction and Aristotle's categories. So, take a hint. It is evident, therefore, that there will not be a certain common, universal, and one good. There is no one class of things called good into which all other things can be comprehended. For it would not be predicated in all the categories as it is, but in only one, if Plato's idea was true. Farther still, since of things which subsist according to one idea, that is, when a certain term is used in only one sense and applies in the same way to all things, there will also be only one science for that thing. A science of all so for all goods there would be one certain science. But now there are many sciences of things which are under one category. Thus, for instance, with occasion, the art of commanding an army is conversant in war, but the medical art in disease. And with the moderate, indeed, the medical art is conversant in food, but the gymnastic art in labor. It may, however, be doubted what their intention is in denominating every idea itself, since in man itself and in man there is one and the same definition of man. For so far as man, there is no difference between them. But if this be the case, neither so far as good will good itself and goods differ, nor will it be in a greater degree good from being eternal. Since neither is that which is white for a long time more white than that which is white only for one day. The Pythagoreans, however, appear to speak more probably or more reasonably concerning what is good. For they place the one in the coordination of things, good, whom Speusippus also seems to have followed. But the discussion of these things pertains to another treatise. A certain doubt, however, presents itself concerning the particulars we have just mentioned, because reasons are not assigned concerning every good, but things which are of themselves the objects of pursuit and love. These are predicated according to one species, and those things which are effective of these, or in a certain respect preserve them, or impede their contraries, are predicated on account of these, after another manner. It is evident, therefore, that goods may be predicated in two ways, and that some things indeed are good per se in and of themselves, but others are good on account of these, or relatively. Separating, therefore, goods per se from things useful, let us consider whether they are predicated according to one and the same idea. But what kind of goods can be said to be good per se in and of themselves? Are they such as are pursued alone, apart from other things, such as to be wise, or to see, and some pleasures and honors? For these, though we pursue them on account of something else, yet at the same time may be ranked by someone among goods which are good per se in and of themselves. Or is the good per se nothing else except an idea? Form, therefore, or idea, this is Platonic teaching, will be vain. But if these also rank among goods which are good per se, it will be requisite that the same definition of the good should be conspicuous in all of them, just as there is the same definition of whiteness. But of honor and prudence and pleasure, there will be other and different definitions so far as they are goods. The good, therefore, is not something common according to one idea. In what manner, however, is it said that there is one idea of the good? For it does not resemble things which are fortuitously homonymous. It is because all goods are from one and are referred to one good, or is it rather according to analogy? For as sight in the body, so is intellect in the soul, and another thing in another. Perhaps, however, these things must be omitted at present. In other words, Aristotle's showing us that there are controversial questions to discuss with regard to the good. But he said it twice now in this chapter, that this is not the place for these discussions. And that's why I told you, if you're not comfortable with the content of chapter 6, you should just skip it for now, okay? But I'm going to continue reading for the sake of completeness. Perhaps, however, these things must be omitted at present, for the accurate discussion of them will be better adapted to another philosophy or another branch of philosophy. And in a similar manner concerning idea, For even if there is some one good which is predicated in common, or which is something itself separate by itself, it is evident that it can neither be practicable nor acquired by man. But now that which is practicable by man, and which he may obtain, is the object of investigation. Perhaps, however, the knowledge of this separate good may to someone appear to be better with respect to those goods which may be acquired, and which are practicable. For having this good as an exemplar, we may in a greater degree know those things which are good for us, and by knowing may more easily obtain them. This assertion, therefore, has induced a certain probability, but it seems to be dissonant to the sciences. For all the sciences aspire after a certain good, and investigate that which is wanting, omitting the knowledge of it. Though it is not reasonable to suppose that all artists are ignorant of and do not search for an aid of such great importance. It is likewise dubious what advantage a weaver or a carpenter would derive to their arts from the knowledge of the good itself, or the ultimate Platonic good. Or how he who surveys the idea itself of the good will become more skilled in medicine, or in commanding an army. For it appears that the physician does not in this way consider health, but that he considers the health of man, and perhaps rather the health of a particular man, for he restores health to an individual. And thus much concerning these things. So in chapter 6, what you should take away from it is that Aristotle discusses the Platonic idea that good is a category or ultimate genus into which all things are contained. Aristotle rejects that idea. He disproves that idea, gets into it a little bit in chapter 6, but says on a number of occasions, this really isn't the place for us to settle this issue. I simply want to say that Plato's idea of the good is not true, and I'd like us to be able to move on in our pursuit of the knowledge of what is good in my ethics, understanding that we're rejecting Plato's teaching on the good, which is difficult to do since he's a friend, but it's necessary because we must follow the truth, and the truth leads us in a different direction. This is an example of Aristotle improving philosophy, going beyond and correcting the teaching of his own teacher, Plato, in this one important issue of what is the good and whether the good is a universal truth, a universal category of things which contains what Aristotle names as the 10 categories, which are the ultimate, most general genera, which again, you'll understand if you've studied Classical Reasoning 1. If not, spend time on Classical Reasoning 1. This chapter is a good example of why it's important. But for now, in your study of ethics, just skip chapter 6 and go on to chapter 7. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.